So I gave this teaching, has to be about maybe a couple years ago, and I want you to listen to it and compare it to what I've heard in the grapevine, supposedly of what I taught. And I want you to notice the difference. Now, in the clip, I'm talking about roles in the household in terms of understand if we understand one another's roles, we won't get as upset. We'll have different expectations toward one another. Not expecting my wife to do things that I should be doing, not expecting my husband to do things that the wife should be doing. And so that's really what it's about. If you'll notice, I bring up a couple examples, but I'm not making a definitive statement as to whether those are a part of your role. I'm just assuming that those things are some of the things that tend to be kind of hung onto the roles, whether they're, again, inherently or not. Um, so listen to the clip, and then I want you to compare it to the statement that I've heard that supposedly I teach, that it's a sin for men to do dishes. So that's what I've heard. I've never taught that, but that's what my teaching here is characterized as. Now, listen to this clip. I really think that the misunderstanding of the roles as we just laid them out is actually the root of most of the conflicts in your home. I think that even though people may not be able to articulate it in this way, they know down deep that I'm doing something I shouldn't be doing, or something is wrong. Something's not right. Something's not working. I think if we understand the roles, we're rooted in God's love, we're able to not be bitter toward one another, but actually to help one another accomplish your role, which isn't mine. So, like, you won't get mad at him for not doing the dishes. And he won't get mad at you for not bringing in more income or what have you, or not disciplining the kids the way you should. Now, if you look at that clip, I'm talking about generic roles. I give a couple examples, but again, the examples aren't definitively necessarily masculine and feminine. Again, I say earlier on in this lesson that the woman actually has, we go over Proverbs 31, the woman actually has a job that she does from her household. So she can bring in money. So neither one of these examples I use are necessarily masculine or feminine. I bring up two traditionally masculine and feminine activities, but I'm talking about the roles, like that your husband shouldn't take upon the role of whatever that's going to look like in your household. And the same thing for your wife, that your wife should not take upon the role of the man. I do believe there are things that are inherently masculine. I do think that discipline, especially the way that men discipline, as in like through strength, through spanking or something of that nature. I do think that's primarily the role of the man. Not that the woman should never do it. Again, I'm not talking about specific things, but I want you to notice I'm really talking about the generic roles. Whatever the generic role is for the man, he should stay in that role and not go out of it. Whatever the generic role for the woman is, she should be in that role and not feel like she has to go out of it, or or her husband will be mad at her, and vice versa. That's all I'm actually saying there. And yet it gets twisted into, oh, well, Brian said that, men can't do dishes, or, they're going to hell or something. I mean, it gets absurd. So, it gets really absurd. So just if you have someone ever come to you with a teaching, whether it be from me or anyone elders of our church, and it does sound just crazy, you should realize that maybe that person isn't accurately presenting the position, and frankly, they might be doing harm to the ministry. You might want to actually warn them about slander and gossip, and how those things are harmful if you don't really understand a teaching, yet you're passing it on in a way that basically puts it in a horrible light. I mean, this really has undermined my ministry in many ways. From a lot of people. The people leave because they think they hear this. They get upset when they hear it, and it's like, I mean, I don't know why you'd be upset. It sounds, I would just be like, oh, that's kind of an absurd notion. But ultimately, like, you realize, like, it should be something that you're on guard from. Otherwise, someone can just tell you that anyone teaches anything, and you'll believe them. Like, check it. Don't receive the accusation if it's not based on two or three witnesses, meaning sufficient evidence. And I would say, since we have YouTube videos, that you check the source. And look, there are things that I say in this video that they are ambiguous. I've watched it and I'm like, yeah, that could probably be taken like not the way that I meant it. So then what do you need to do? Well, the reason why we have in-person Bible studies is so that you can ask questions and clarify. That's part of discipleship. I mean, imagine if Jesus taught the disciples and no one asked him any questions that clarified what he said. They constantly have questions. They constantly do not understand what he's saying. And look, it helps the teaching. It helps him actually further clarify what he means by something. And so I think it's helpful. Look, if you have an objection or you feel like, oh, I don't quite understand that, then come to a Bible study and ask. One of the pitfalls of ministry is that you say something and people think they understand what you're trying to communicate, but then it gets distorted and then it gets kind of thrown down the grapevine and people say, oh, well, this is what was said. And unfortunately, if someone does not actually sit under your ministry like on a weekly basis, unfortunately, things are ripped out of context or just all and out distorted. Rather than what you say being communicated to other people who might ask about it, or when you relate it, instead it's what you think is being said, or it can be just because you are looking for the worst. You're remembering it in the worst way, or or there's a fear that, oh, well, will this be extreme? And then you kind of take it in the most extreme way. And so there's this, I think, rumor, frankly, that I've taught that it's a sin for men to do dishes or something, or it's a sin for men to like vacuum, or it's a sin for men to like change a diaper or something. And I've had this conversation a couple times with the women in our church and then other men as well. But one, I've never said it's a sin. I'm actually trying to give advice, and I'm really trying to get around to the question as to whether egalitarianism has so taken over our households, even in the Reformed Church, so that there's no distinction in what we do. Like, is there anything that distinguishes between the genders within the household, between the husband and the wife? That's all I'm really asking. And I'm asking the question simply that, like, and I don't mean in the sense of like, you decide, if you're the man, you decide, where you're going to move or something. Those are large questions. And frankly, I mean, I would consult my wife and make sure that she was okay where I was moving. I just wouldn't move there without consulting. So I actually don't think that's really where the picture of distinction between genders is. I think it's in the day-to-day. But what I'm trying to communicate is not that doing dishes as a man is wrong. My kids who are males do dishes. They vacuum the floor. I've done dishes. I've vacuumed the floor. I've changed diapers. That's not the issue. The issue is there anything distinct that is that gives the picture to either your children or to other people or even to yourselves that you're not the same gender? In other words, that there's actually a distinction in genders. Or is everything just the same now? Is it impossible to do that in our society? Has it so changed that, in fact, that we've just been blended together? And although we complain about like transgenderism and no one really understanding differences in gender, is that actually our fault as the church, or at least have we contributed to it? Because we, in fact, have blurred the genders ourselves. It's a larger question. It's not really on this minutia of, whether or not you should, do dishes. Now, it goes to a larger question, and I have asked the question. I actually haven't answered it, but I have asked it as to whether or not certain things are inherently masculine and inherently feminine. And by that, I mean this. Let me just explain. I often kind of give the thought experiment as to, if you had a time machine and you were to go back in time and technology was wiped away, right? You didn't have all the technology that kind of blurs the lines. What would it look like? So if a man, he was going out to plow the field, if he was going out to hunt like an elk or something during the day, then that would leave the woman at home. And of course, if the woman had children or whatever, she would be in the household. When you cook something in the ancient world, you can't just, today a guy can come home and he can just do his own laundry, right? He can just throw it in the laundry machine. He can just, take it out, throw it in the dryer, it's done. He can come home, he can pop something in the microwave for dinner, he can pop something in the conventional oven. You know, without the technology, you actually had to like gather the wood and burn it in the oven, and then get the oven real hot. Then remove all the wood from the oven, and then put it in the oven. If you had like a wood burning like a stone oven or whatever, if you had a regular oven, you had to do kind of similar to the same thing. And then you had to like get all the ingredients for the food. Usually you had to get them out of the garden, and then you had to, get the wheat from the barn, and then you had to like, do the whole thing with the dough and let it rise and all of this. So it was an all-day process. It was an all-day thing. There was no coming home, popping something in the microwave. And my point simply is that, or the question really is that, did God actually make the man and woman knowing that these would be their roles? Or are they just arbitrarily assigned to where the woman can just go out and plow the field, and she can go hunt the elk, and the man could just stay home and, get food on the table? Laundry sometimes took like 3-4 days to do, depending on what you were doing, especially if you're doing like sheets or something. Doing dishes, there's no running water in the home. So if you ate at night, you're eating dinner at night, you're not doing dishes until the next day, when you can go down to the river or whatever water source you have. And the man's going to be gone during the day. So who's doing the dishes inherently? And so my only point is to ask the question, are there things that are inherently masculine or feminine? But even if they're not, the larger point is to ask, is there any distinction between men and women in the picture of Christ and the church in your home? Is there any distinction between you? Or is it just this general feeling of like, well, I feel like I'm in submission to my husband. I feel like my wife's in submission to me. And that's fine. But all this teaching is a suggestion to you to really evaluate your home. It's not a matter of making rules for you or giving you another 10 commandments of how the home should be run or something of that nature. It's trying to get you to be aware that we've been highly affected by technology. We've been highly affected by feminism in our culture to a much greater degree than most people realize. Most people, not just women, but men in our culture, do not realize how much they have really been influenced in terms of their day-to-day lives by these things that frankly are not actually biblical, these views that come from feminism and whatnot. In neo-Marxism, marriage itself, in neo-Marxism, marriage itself is actually seen as an oppressor type institution. And even though most Christians wouldn't view marriage that way, you can tell that most Christians are always on the look. They're always out for who's actually teaching something that could turn marriage into that. Because wow, it's a dangerous institution. It could just turn bad at any moment, and so because of that, you just got to be on the look for people who might say anything at all that could turn this, just egalitarian institution into something that is more patriarchal and therefore tyrannical in the modern mind. As Christians and we as a church, we need to be really careful that we're not overly worried about the patriarchy taking over and the tyranny and all of that. Yes, that is something we should be on the look for. But I'm trying to actually convey to you that you should be on the look more for the fact that there's a blending to where you're basically introducing something that's gender non-binary. I mean, it's almost like a culture of, if I do the same things that you do and you do the same things that I do, how are we different? Um, and you might say, well, I don't think we have to do things the same way. That's fine. I'm suggesting this to you. Not every teaching is like ex cathedra, you're going to hell if you don't agree, or something of that nature. Some things are just like, look, I'm just suggesting this to you. Having studied this for so many years and been on the look for all these things, and trying to analyze, like, why do we do this rather than that, I'm just suggesting this to you. In no way am I saying, oh, well, then I guess you're just not a great Christian because you think otherwise, because you do the dishes and your wife doesn't. That has nothing to do with the point. Those are just the minutia. Those are just examples of, like, hey, could it be like dishes? Could it be like laundry? Could it be vacuuming? Could it, what? I'm really just asking the question, like, what is it? Is there anything at all that's distinct to where the wife should have management of that versus the husband having management of it? Or is everything just shared and there's no distinction? The second thing that I'm trying to convey to women often in this conversation is that whether or not you believe that certain things are inherently masculine or feminine, or you don't, um, to be careful, because I do counsel so many women who lose their desire for their husbands, to be careful that if you think in your mind, whether it's because it's inherently there or just it's a tradition or whatever, it's stuck in your head, that a particular thing is feminine, whatever you do, I would not normatively, obviously there are exceptions, but normatively, I probably wouldn't have your husband do that if you think that's feminine, because you do not want to put your husband in a place where you're viewing him as, in a feminine way. That's not going to be attractive to you. Masculine and feminine actually are attracted to one another. This is true, like, even in a homosexual relationship or a lesbian relationship, you've got masculine and feminine that are actually attracted. So I'm just trying to, again, this is a suggestion to the women that maybe don't have your husband do that. Maybe if you need help in that area, try to get another woman. Now, one of the problems, again, in the progression of our culture is that we just have destroyed community. So women often had so much more help. They had extended family that lived with them, whether parents, grandparents, sisters, brothers. It was often, people, just a large amount of people living together. They had a larger families. Their children grew up and helped out and whatnot. They had servants. They had all sorts of help. And even if they didn't have that, they had close-knit communities. Because our culture has progressed to where we largely feel safe, we don't really need to live next to each other. We don't have the feeling that we need to live next to each other so much. So we live miles away from one another. There's not as much community. It'd be very different if we lived in some tribe. Again, going back in time, living in some tribe and another tribe wanted to kill us. Well, now we all have to live like right next to each other. But that creates a community and an amount of help that people have that, frankly, they just don't have today. And so, again, these are just suggestions of, like, can we recreate this community to where women don't feel overwhelmed and don't feel like, oh, man, I need my husband to do this stuff, because they already are getting so much help, and it's all getting done from other women, from family, from whatever it may be. Now, obviously, again, in your household, if you need your husband to do something, so be it. That's not the point. It never was the point. No one's saying it's sin for your husband to help you. That's not the point. The point is the two big things I just mentioned. One, asking the question, have we really been just leveled out? Are we just basically spinning our wheels and saying, yes, there's a difference between men and women, but practically we actually act like there's none? I don't know about you. I don't really want to do that. I don't really care what you believe in your head. If it doesn't look on the ground the same as it is in your head, then who cares? If there really is no distinction between genders in our practice, just in our theory. Like, I want my theory and practice to be the same. If it's supposed to be the same now because technology has changed, times have changed, hey, we're in the 21st century, and that was what God wanted us to do in the Bible because that's the way culture was, but culture's something different now, so God doesn't care about it anymore, then I don't care about it anymore. I'm fine. I don't care what you do. Have the guy stay home and he can raise the children, and the woman can go off to work and she can go, whatever. Because frankly, again, the jobs that are different now, right? I mean, it's the man had to go like hunt an elk or put on a huge plow with a horse or an oxen and plow the field all day. That's not really work that, women are built for. Can a woman do it? Sure, but they're not really built for it. But now the job is you go sit at a desk at a computer. Well, I mean, either gender can do that. So again, has our modern culture blotted out the distinctions of genders? And really, this whole conversation that I brought up, whether it be 2 years ago or I think we talked about it about 6 months ago as well, it's never meant to give you a rule book. It's actually just meant to help you understand. Look, to ask the question: are we losing ourselves in terms of our gender because our culture wants to blot out gender? Our culture wants to blot out gender because it wants to blot out family. It wants to blot out those things that make us distinct. Those distinctions are beautiful. They're referred to as glory, the glory of God, the glory of man. Glory is a term for beauty. They're beautiful in the eyes of God. They're made to be beautiful, and they are displayed beautifully in their distinction. But if there is no more distinction, we lose the beauty. We lose the sense of who we are as men and women. And so that's what the discussion is really about. It has zero to do with the specifics. If you think that doing dishes is neutral, it's not something inherently masculine or feminine, and you don't have that tradition in your head where you'd lose attraction or whatever, that's fine. I don't care who does the dishes. It doesn't matter. It has nothing to do with anything. But if you do think there's some things in your household that are inherently masculine, I would say, if there's an intruder in the house, I think it's inherently masculine for you to go, as a man, confront the intruder. Now, you might say, well, again, we have modern culture that levels this out because my wife has a shotgun. So my wife can just do it now. But that's really what I'm trying to point out is that, yes, I agree. Your wife probably can be an excellent sharpshooter. She can, she can be excellent with a gun. But is that technology taking away something inherent in a role that we should be playing as men? And that's simply all I was ever asking with women, and bringing up examples of what might possibly be. I wasn't making any sort of definite conclusion. It's really just asking the question. So when you hear things like this through the grapevine, or you hear something like, "Oh, well, Brian believes that men doing dishes is a sin," you should understand. That's an absurdity. It really is, and you should. If you think something is so absurd, how can I possibly have said it? I would ask that you maybe even think, oh, maybe he didn't really say that. Because I didn't say that. That's not what I said. And that's not what I was trying to get at. It wasn't that, oh, it's a sin. Now, if you should conclude that some things are inherently masculine and inherently feminine, and you go ahead and do them anyway, knowing that they violate, God's order or something, well, it might be sin for you if you actually have concluded that. I haven't concluded that. I don't have a conclusion on anything in the household. I'm simply asking the question, is this, is that, what about this, what about this? What do you think about that? And it's really to start a conversation, not to end one, because it's just trying to get you to think. And I do think that, look, if your answer to that question is, well, the distinction in our roles is that I stay home. My wife actually made this point. She said, I think a lot of women have the idea that, well, I stay home and he goes to work, and that's how we kind of distinguish our roles. So regardless of how you act, or regardless of what, things you do during the day or what have you, just by virtue of you staying home, somehow that is a distinction in the roles. And again, I would just say, well, why are you staying home? Why is he going to work? Like, what's the point of that if there's nothing in distinction that you do while you're at home that he can't do while he's at home? Or if there's no distinction that while he's going out, you can also just go out and do the same thing. Again, you see how our culture has so muddied the waters that we're so confused about what am I supposed to be doing as a man or a woman? Or is it just that we are no longer men and women? We're just androgynous. We're just these, literally unisex beings that can do the same thing that the other person does. And there's no distinction between them, whether you're talking about in the day-to-day or even the larger picture. And so again, these are just things to ask. They're questions to kind of look over and say, hey, am I being deluded? Is my family running in accordance with the larger principles in Scripture that talk about the roles of men and women and the distinction in genders? So I hope that that's helpful. I realize sometimes when we're doing things in Bible study, or and I talk very forthrightly very people can't often distinguish when I'm suggesting something and when I'm putting forth an idea and wanting people to debate it, versus when I'm speaking like, no, this is what it is and you need to believe it. So more dogmatically versus what is a suggestion. And maybe that's my fault. I'm sure I'm to blame in that, in the way that I just speak. I'm not trying to give that impression. I think it's just a matter of maybe the way I teach or something. I don't know. But again, I just would ask that you give the benefit of the doubt and you think about the things that we teach. And if you ever come across something that like, oh, I don't know about that, that sounds crazy, it may be that our culture is so far removed that biblical things sound crazy, so we should discuss them. But when it comes to things like that, it's a sin to change a diaper or something. Maybe ask for qualification from the source, and kind of just clip the grapevine from I think distorting those things. It'd be really helpful, I think, for the ministry. And even for you, look, if you think that crazy things are being said, you're not going to sit under a ministry like that. So it's important for you. If you don't sit under a ministry like that, then you're not going to learn the things that God might have for you through that ministry. If you're going to a local church, it's kind of important that you sit under the teaching of the local church, if you're going to go to that church. So all that to say, I hope that's helpful in clarifying, because I've heard from, the grapevine myself, things like, oh, are you saying this is sin? And I'm like, no. Now, I do have a larger view of sin than I think most people. I think most people think sin means just whatever is like commanded explicitly, and then you break that. Obviously, I think sin is a lot more extensive than that. We might give a definition. There are multiple definitions you can give to sin. One of them would be, and I say one of them, would be basically whatever God desires in terms of his created order. If we're not shooting for that and we're missing the mark, we might be, sinning, transgressing, trespassing in some way. But ultimately, we should care, right? We should care about what the Lord wants, what our Father wants us to do. And we should ask these questions. Are we doing in accordance with what he has laid out in Scripture, or is what we're doing inconsistent with it? Again, has the time changed to where the Bible's no longer relevant in those areas, or is it relevant, and in what way? Let's actually talk about from A to Z. What is it? What might it look like, at least in one particular household? So again, I hope that's helpful, and God bless you guys, and we'll see you next time.